You do not make a submarine fast. This is not a limitation born from engineering timidity. It is not a constraint imposed by conservative naval architects afraid to innovate. It is a fundamental law of physics, proven by mathematics and validated by every submarine that had ever operated beneath the waves. Water is thick. Water is heavy. Water resists movement with a force that increases exponentially with speed. Push a submarine through water at 5 knots, and the resistance is manageable. Push it to 10 knots, and the resistance quadruples. Push it to 15 knots, and you are fighting forces that demand engines so powerful, so large, so fuel-hungry, that they cannot fit inside a pressure hull with room left for weapons, crew, and life support. This is why submarines, for the first 50 years of their existence, were slow. Diesel-electric boats from World War II could make perhaps 8 knots submerged on battery power, and only for a few hours before the batteries died and they had to surface to recharge. Even the revolutionary nuclear-powered USS Nautilus, commissioned in 1954 with unlimited endurance, could only manage about 23 knots submerged. Fast for a submarine, but still slower than most surface warships. And there was another problem, one that naval architects believed was insurmountable. Streamlining didn't help. On the surface, this made intuitive sense. Submarines were designed to operate on the surface most of the time, diving only to attack or evade. Their hulls were optimized for surface running, long, narrow, with a flat deck, a tall conning tower, and external ballast tanks. When submerged, these hulls pushed through water like a brick, creating turbulence and drag that no amount of engine power could overcome efficiently. Some engineers suggested radical redesigns, teardrop-shaped hulls, smooth surfaces, minimal protrusions. But the Navy resisted. Submarines needed deck guns, periscopes, antennas, cleats for mooring. They needed flat decks for crew to work on when surfaced. A streamlined teardrop hull would sacrifice all of that for theoretical performance gains that might not even materialize. By 1955, the United States Navy accepted this reality. Submarines would always be slower than surface ships. Nuclear propulsion gave them unlimited range and endurance, but not speed. American attack submarines would hunt Soviet targets through patience, stealth, and superior sonar, not through speed. The Soviet Union believed the same thing. Their submarine designers faced identical physics, identical constraints, identical compromises. Soviet boats were just as slow as American boats for the same fundamental reasons. But in 1955, one experimental submarine proved that everything every Navy believed about underwater hydrodynamics was wrong. January 1955, Portsmouth Naval Shipyard, Kittery, Maine. The temperature is 12 degrees Fahrenheit. Ice coats the piers and the rigging of ships moored in the pool yard. Steam rises from the dark water of the Piscataqua River where it meets the Atlantic. A small crowd of naval officers, civilian engineers, and shipyard workers has gathered on Pier 11 despite the bitter cold. They are watching a submarine unlike any that has ever been built. USS Albacore, hull number AGSS 569. She is not a combat submarine. She is a research vessel designed by the David Taylor Model Basin to test a radical hypothesis that a properly streamlined hull could move through water with far less resistance than conventional submarine designs. Albacore looks wrong. She looks like someone took a submarine and melted it. No flat surfaces, no sharp angles, no protruding structures except the minimal sail necessary to house periscopes and antennas. She is a perfect teardrop. Rounded bow, gradually expanding diameter to maximum beam amidships, then tapering smoothly to a fine point at the stern. 196 feet long, diameter of 27 feet at the widest point, displacing 1,500 tons. She looks too fat, too round, too simple to be effective. The conventional submarines moored nearby, Tang-class diesel boats with their traditional long, narrow hulls, look like proper warships. Albacore looks like a toy. But the engineers at the David Taylor Model Basin have run the calculations. They have tested scale models in water tunnels. The physics are irrefutable. A teardrop shape moving through a fluid experiences dramatically less drag than a cylindrical shape. At low speeds, the difference is modest. At high speeds, the difference becomes revolutionary. Albacore is powered by diesel-electric propulsion, the same technology that has powered submarines since World War I. She has a single shaft driving a 5-bladed propeller. On paper, her engines are unremarkable, but her hull is revolutionary. The crowd watches as Albacore's crew makes final preparations for her first full-power sea trial. This is the moment when theory meets reality. The model basin tests suggested Albacore could exceed 20 knots submerged, extraordinary speed for a diesel submarine. But models are not reality. Turbulence behaves unpredictably at full scale. Propellers cavitate, forming bubbles that destroy thrust and create noise. Control surfaces flutter and fail under hydrodynamic loads. If the engineers are wrong, Albacore will be a slow, clumsy failure. If they are right, they will have proven that 50 years of submarine design doctrine was based on false assumptions. At 0900 hours, Albacore casts off and heads to sea. The tests are conducted in deep water off the New Hampshire coast, far from shipping lanes and prying eyes. The Soviet Union would love to know what the Americans are testing. This entire project is classified. Albacore dives to 100 feet and begins her acceleration runs. 5 knots, 10 knots, 15 knots. At each speed increment, her commander, Commander Paul R. Schratz, monitors every gauge, every control surface, every vibration. The crew listens for unusual sounds. The engineers record data on flow noise, pressure distributions, propeller efficiency. At 18 knots, Albacore is moving faster submerged than any American submarine has ever moved. The hull is smooth. The controls are responsive. She maneuvers like a fighter aircraft compared to the sluggish handling of conventional submarines. Commander Schratz orders maximum power. The diesel generators strain. The electric motors drive the propeller to maximum RPM. Albacore accelerates to 26 knots, submerged. 26 knots. Faster than most surface warships. Faster than any Soviet submarine. Faster than the laws of underwater hydrodynamics said was practical. The engineers are jubilant. The teardrop hull works. The drag reduction is real. The speed is real. But there is a problem. A fundamental, inescapable problem that limits what Albacore has achieved. Diesel-electric propulsion. The engines that drove Albacore to 26 knots can only run for a few hours before the batteries are depleted. Then she must surface or snorkel to recharge, exposing herself to detection, losing the speed advantage that makes her revolutionary. What Albacore needs, what the concept desperately needs, is nuclear propulsion, unlimited endurance, unlimited power, the ability to maintain high speed for days, weeks, as long as necessary. But combining a teardrop hull with nuclear propulsion presents challenges no one has solved. Nuclear reactors are large, heavy, complex. They require shielding, coolant systems, steam generators, turbines. Fitting all of that into a teardrop hull while maintaining the streamlining that makes the hull effective is an engineering nightmare. And there is another problem: risk. Building an experimental diesel submarine like Albacore is one thing. Building a nuclear-powered teardrop hull submarine is another. Nuclear submarines cost 10 times as much as diesel boats. If the design fails, the Navy will have wasted hundreds of millions of dollars and years of construction time. Worse, if the hull design proves unstable at high speed, the crew could die, and the nuclear reactor could be lost. The conservative approach would be to build more conventional nuclear submarines. Proven designs like the Skate class, which are slower but reliable. Let someone else take the risk of combining nuclear power with radical hydrodynamics. But in 1956, as Albacore's test results are analyzed and disseminated through the Navy's submarine design community, one man looks at the data and sees not risk but opportunity. Admiral Hyman G. Rickover, the father of the nuclear navy, the most powerful and most feared figure in American naval engineering, a man who does not accept limitations, who does not tolerate caution, who demands results regardless of difficulty. Rickover reviews the Albacore test data and understands immediately what it means. Speed is survival. Speed is offensive capability. Speed is the difference between hunting Soviet submarines and being hunted by them. If Albacore's hull can reach 26 knots on diesel-electric power, a nuclear-powered version could reach 30 knots or more and maintain that speed indefinitely. He orders the design teams to begin work immediately on a nuclear-powered Teardrop hull submarine, not an experimental testbed like Albacore. A fully operational attack submarine, armed with torpedoes, designed for combat, ready to deploy against the Soviet submarine fleet. The new submarine will be designated SSN 585. She will be named Skipjack, after the fast, aggressive fish that hunts in open water. And she will either revolutionize submarine warfare or prove that some laws of physics cannot be negotiated. April 7th, 1959. Electric Boat Division, General Dynamics Corporation, Groton, Connecticut. USS Skipjack floats at the pier, ready for sea trials. She has been commissioned for 4 months, but commissioning is ceremony, not validation. Sea trials are validation. Sea trials are where theory is tested against reality, where engineering calculations are proven or disproven, where crews discover whether their boat is a masterpiece or a coffin. Commander William W. Behrens, Jr. stands on Skipjack's small, streamlined sail, looking down at his boat. He is 38 years old, a Naval Academy graduate who has spent his entire career in submarines. He commanded diesel boats during the final years of World War II. He has served on the first nuclear submarines. He understands what he is looking at. Skipjack is beautiful in the way that purely functional things are beautiful. No wasted space, no unnecessary protrusions. Every curve, every surface, every feature exists because the mathematics demands it. She is 251 feet long, shorter than the Skate-class nuclear submarines she is meant to replace. Her beam is 31 feet, giving her a hull diameter far greater than conventional submarines relative to her length. Her displacement is 3,075 tons submerged. She looks stubby, almost dumpy compared to the sleek length of diesel submarines. But Behrens knows what's inside. He knows that beneath the streamlined hull is an S5W pressurized water reactor, the same reactor that powers the larger Skate-class submarines. He knows that Reactor generates 15,000 shaft horsepower, driving a single propeller through reduction gears designed to operate at speeds no submarine propeller has ever sustained. He knows that Skipjack has been designed to reach speeds above 30 knots submerged, speeds at which control becomes exponentially more difficult, at which the slightest miscalculation can send the boat into an uncontrolled dive or surface breach. Speeds at which cavitation can destroy the propeller in seconds, at which turbulence can tear control surfaces from the hull. And he knows that no one has ever operated a submarine at those speeds in combat configuration. Albacore reached 26 knots, but Albacore was a test platform, stripped of weapons and most operational equipment. Skipjack is a warship, loaded with torpedoes, sonar systems, combat control equipment. She weighs more. She is less streamlined. The calculations suggest she will still be faster than any submarine afloat, but calculations are not certainty. Behrens turns to his executive officer, Lieutenant Commander Robert P. Peterson. Status of the boat? All systems nominal, Captain. Reactor is critical and holding steady. Engineering reports ready for sustained high-power operations. Weapons systems safed for sea trials. Crew is at stations. Behrens nods. Very well. Prepare to get underway. The crew of USS Skipjack numbers 93 officers and enlisted men, smaller than conventional nuclear submarines, because the automated reactor design and streamlined hull require less maintenance personnel. They have trained together for months, drilling on every system, every procedure, every emergency scenario. They know their boat, but they do not yet know what their boat can do. At 1,000 hours, Skipjack's lines are cast off. Tugs maneuver her away from the pier and into the Thames River channel. The submarine proceeds on electric motors at minimal speed, following navigation buoys downstream toward Long Island Sound and the Atlantic beyond. The test area is southeast of Montauk Point, in deep water beyond the continental shelf. 300 miles of open ocean where Skipjack can run at speed without risk of collision, where the ocean floor drops to depths exceeding 600 feet, deep enough to test the submarine's full performance envelope. But reaching the test area will take 14 hours at economical speed. Behrens uses the transit time to brief his officers on the test plan. They gather in the wardroom, the cramped officers' dining space that doubles as a briefing room. Behrens spreads nautical charts across the table, showing the test area boundaries. Gentlemen, the primary objective of these trials is to validate Skipjack's high-speed handling characteristics and determine maximum sustainable speed. Naval reactors wants data on reactor performance at sustained high power. Warships wants data on hull stresses and flow noise. Commsublant wants to know if this boat can do what the designers promised. He pauses, looking at each officer. But let's be clear about what we're really testing. We are validating a concept that will determine the future of the submarine force. If Skipjack performs as designed, every attack submarine the Navy builds for the next 20 years will use this hull form. If she doesn't, if the hull proves unstable at speed, if cavitation destroys the propeller, if reactor cooling can't keep up with power demand, then we go back to building slow, conventional hull submarines, and we accept that Soviet boats will eventually match or exceed our performance. The engineering officer, Lieutenant Michael Harkin, raises a hand. Captain, what's the test protocol if we encounter unexpected vibration or control issues at high speed? Immediate power reduction and return to baseline speed. We're not here to break the boat. We're here to find her limits safely. Behrens taps the chart. We'll conduct incremental speed runs, starting at 15 knots, then 20, then 25, then maximum. At each plateau, we'll hold speed for 30 minutes, while engineering monitors all parameters. If everything looks good, we advance to the next increment. And if we're ordered to maximum power without plateau testing. This from the weapons officer, Lieutenant Raymond Volpe, who has clearly been reading between the lines of their orders. Behrens allows himself a slight smile. Then we'll find out very quickly if the engineers got the math right. The officers laugh, but it's nervous laughter. They all understand the stakes. April 8th, 1959, 0600 hours, 125 miles southeast of Montauk Point, Long Island. The sky is overcast, the sea state moderate with 8-foot swells. Wind from the northeast at 15 knots. Visibility 5 miles. Weather conditions that would make surface ship operations uncomfortable, but are irrelevant to a submarine. Skipjack has been running on the surface overnight, her reactor providing power to the electric motors through the ship's turbine generators. But surface running is inefficient. The hull form designed for underwater speed creates significant resistance when half submerged. Behrens has been eager to dive since clearing Long Island Sound. Officer of the deck, clear the bridge. Prepare to dive. The 3 lookouts and OOD scramble down the ladder from the tiny bridge atop the sail. Behrens is the last man down. He dogs the hatch shut himself, turning the heavy wheel until the lugs engage fully, sealing the pressure hull. The control room is cramped, lit by dim red lighting that preserves night vision. Every surface is covered with gauges, switches, indicators. The helmsman and plainsman sit at their control stations, hands on the aircraft-style control wheels that adjust the boat's angle and direction. Behind them, the diving officer monitors the ballast control panel, a complex array of switches and indicators showing the status of every tank, every vent, every pump. Dive the boat. Make your depth 100 feet. The diving officer's response is immediate. Dive, aye, helm, all ahead 1/3, 10-degree down bubble. The ballast tanks flood. Skipjack's bow angles downward. The depth gauge begins to climb. 20 feet, 40 feet, 60 feet, 80 feet, 100 feet. Level at 100 feet, Captain. Behrens feels the boat settle into her element. The motion changes, no longer the rolling, pitching movement of surface running, but the smooth, stable glide of an aircraft in flight. The teardrop hull is doing what it was designed to do, moving through water with minimal resistance, minimal turbulence. All. Ahead, 2/3. Make turns for 15 knots. The reactor responds. Steam pressure builds. The turbines accelerate. The propeller bites into the water. Skipjack accelerates smoothly, effortlessly. The speed indicator climbs. 8 knots, 10 knots, 12 knots, 15 knots. At 15 knots, the boat is rock steady. No vibration. No unusual sounds. The helm responds instantly to inputs. Skipjack turns like a fighter aircraft, banking into a 15-degree angle that would be impossible for a conventional submarine at this speed. The engineering officer's voice comes through the intercom from the maneuvering room aft. Con. Maneuvering. Reactor and steam plants operating normally. All temperatures and pressures nominal. No unusual vibrations detected. Behrens allows himself a moment of satisfaction. 15 knots is routine, but it validates the basic design. The hull is sound. The reactor integration is successful. Now comes the real test. All ahead standard. Make turns for 20 knots. The turbines accelerate further. The propeller RPM increases. Skipjack surges forward. 20 knots. Still smooth. Still stable. The boat feels alive, responsive, eager. Behrens has commanded diesel submarines that shuddered and groaned at 8 knots. Skipjack is doing 20 knots and feels like she's barely trying. Maneuvering con. Status? Con. Maneuvering. All parameters normal. Reactor at 60% power. Primary coolant temperature within limits. No issues detected. 60% power. They're using 60% of available reactor output to maintain 20 knots. That leaves enormous reserve. Conventional nuclear submarines would be at 90% power to make 20 knots. Skipjack is demonstrating the fundamental advantage of hydrodynamic efficiency. Less drag means less power required, which means more speed is available. Very well. All ahead full. Make turns for 25 knots. This is where it gets interesting. 25 knots is approaching the threshold where water flow over the hull becomes turbulent, where cavitation threatens the propeller, where control surfaces experience loads they were never designed to handle. The speed indicator climbs. 21 knots, 22, 23, 24, 25. And then something changes. Not catastrophically, not dangerously, but noticeably. A low-frequency vibration begins to resonate through the hull. Not loud, not violent, but present. The plainsman reports. Captain, I'm getting some flutter on the stern planes. Nothing I can't control, but it's there. The sonar operator adds. Con, sonar. I'm picking up increased flow noise. Sounds like turbulence developing aft of the sail. Behrens walks to the sonar station and listens to the acoustic feed through the operator's headphones. He can hear it. A rushing, hissing sound that wasn't present at 20 knots. Turbulence. Water flowing over the sail is separating from the hull, creating vortices and eddies. Not dangerous, but not ideal. At higher speeds, that turbulence could worsen. Maneuvering, Con. How's the reactor? Con. Maneuvering. 80% power. All parameters nominal. We've got plenty of reserve. 80%. That means they can go faster. The question is whether they should. Behrens studies the depth gauge. 100 feet. If something goes wrong at high speed, if control is lost, if the boat goes into an uncommanded dive, they have only 100 feet between them and the surface, or 500 feet between them and crush depth at this location. Not much margin for error. Make your depth 300 feet. Skipjack descends smoothly. At 300 feet, the water pressure is 130 pounds per square inch. The hull creaks slightly as it compresses under load, but the sounds are normal. The additional depth gives them margin, room to recover if something unexpected happens. Behrens returns to the command position in the center of the control room. He grips the handrail mounted on the periscope stand. Around him, his crew waits. This is the moment. The test that will validate or disprove everything the designers promised. Maximum power, maximum speed, the threshold where physics becomes unpredictable, where engineering calculations meet the chaotic reality of turbulent flow. All ahead flank, make turns for maximum speed. The engineering officer's voice comes immediately. Con, maneuvering. Answering ahead flank, reactor at 100%, opening throttles to maximum steam flow. The turbines accelerate to a scream. The propeller bites into the water with tremendous force. Skipjack leaps forward like a racehorse released from the gate. 26 knots, 27, 28, 29, 30. The speed indicator continues climbing. 31 knots, 32, 33. And USS Skipjack, a 3,075-ton nuclear submarine, designed and built by human engineers, using mathematics and metal, is moving through water at 33 knots submerged, faster than any submarine has ever moved, faster than most surface warships, fast enough to chase down Soviet cruisers, fast enough to evade torpedoes, fast enough to rewrite every doctrine of submarine warfare. The vibration is stronger now. The hull resonates with the power of the reactor, the thrust of the propeller, the resistance of the water. But it's controlled vibration, predicted vibration. The boat is stable, the controls respond, the crew holds their stations with professional calm, even as they feel history being made beneath their feet. Behrens looks at the speed indicator, 33 knots, and the needle is still climbing, 34. He keys the intercom to maneuvering. "How much more can you give me?" The engineering officer's response carries a note of exhilaration. "Captain, we're at 100% reactor power, but we haven't maxed out the steam plant. I can give you another 2, maybe 3 knots if you want it." Behrens considers. The designers estimated maximum speed at 33 knots. They're already exceeding design specifications, pushing further risks, cavitation damage to the propeller, risks pushing the hull into flow regimes that weren't modeled, risks discovering failure modes that the engineers didn't predict. But they're here, they're stable, and the Navy needs to know what this boat can really do. "Give me everything you've got." The steam plant operators in the maneuvering room push the throttles beyond normal operating parameters. The turbines are screaming now, a high-pitched whine that penetrates through the insulated bulkheads into the control room. The propeller is turning at RPM that would have destroyed conventional submarine propellers through cavitation, the formation of vapor bubbles that collapse with explosive force, eroding the metal. But Skipjack's propeller is not conventional. It is a 5-bladed skewed design, shaped by thousands of hours of water tunnel testing, optimized to delay cavitation onset to speeds no submarine propeller had ever sustained. 35 knots. The speed indicator needle trembles at 35 knots. Skipjack is moving through water at 40 miles per hour, submerged, at 300 feet depth, faster than a surface destroyer, faster than most torpedoes of the era, fast enough to outrun anything the Soviet Navy has afloat. Behrens feels the hull vibrating beneath his feet, a harmonic resonance that rises and falls as turbulent flow patterns shift across the streamlined surfaces. It is not dangerous vibration. It is the sound of hydrodynamic forces at the edge of what engineers understand, where computational models give way to empirical reality. Con, sonar. I'm getting significant flow noise now. It's masking our passive sonar capability. This is expected. At 35 knots, water rushing past Skipjack's hull creates broadband acoustic noise that overwhelms the sensitive passive sonar arrays. The boat is moving too fast to listen, but she can still be heard. By any Soviet submarine within 50 miles, Skipjack's propeller noise would be unmistakable, a cavitating roar that announces her presence like a jet aircraft. But that assumes Soviet submarines have sonar sensitive enough to hear through their own flow noise at the speeds they would need to intercept. And Behrens knows, from classified intelligence briefs, that no Soviet submarine can sustain more than 28 knots submerged. Skipjack has a 7-knot speed advantage. 7 knots is the difference between hunter and prey. Helm, come left to new course 270. Let's see how she handles at speed. The helmsman rotates his control wheel. Skipjack banks into the turn like a fighter aircraft. 15 degrees of roll angle, her control surfaces biting into the water flow. The turn radius is astonishingly tight for a vessel displacing 3,000 tons. Conventional submarines turn like buses, ponderous and slow. Skipjack turns like a sports car, but the turn reveals a problem. As the boat banks, the stern planes, the horizontal control surfaces at the rear of the submarine, experience asymmetric flow. Water hits them at an angle they were not optimized for. The planesman feels it instantly through the control wheel. "Captain, I'm getting heavy flutter on the stern planes. The wheel is fighting me." Behrens moves to stand behind the planesman. He can see the man's knuckles white on the control wheel, fighting the hydraulic feedback as the planes vibrate under turbulent flow. "Can you maintain depth?" "Yes, sir, but if this gets worse..." An alarm sounds, sharp, insistent. The engineering officer's voice cuts through the intercom with urgency that makes every man in the control room tense. "Con, maneuvering, reactor scram, I say again, reactor scram." The world seems to slow down. A reactor scram, an emergency shutdown, is the nightmare every nuclear submarine crew trains for, but prays never happens. When a reactor scrams, control rods drop into the reactor core, stopping the nuclear reaction instantly. Steam generation stops. Turbine power drops to 0. The submarine loses propulsion. At 35 knots, Skipjack's momentum will carry her forward for a time, but without propulsion, she will slow rapidly. And with the reactor scrammed, they have no way to restart propulsion quickly. It takes hours to bring a scrammed reactor back online. Behrens' mind is already racing through emergency procedures. "All stop. Planesman, maintain 300 feet. Sonar, active search for surface contacts." But even as he gives the orders, the engineering officer's voice comes back, calmer now, almost sheepish. "Con, maneuvering. Correction. False scram. The vibration triggered the seismic scram sensor. Reactor is still critical. Disregard my last." The relief in the control room is palpable. Men exhale. Someone laughs nervously. Behrens feels his heart rate begin to slow. A false scram. The hull vibration at 35 knots was strong enough to trigger the seismic sensor that's designed to scram the reactor if the submarine strikes the ocean floor or suffers a collision. It's a safety system doing its job, but in this case, doing it too well. "Maneuvering, Con. Can you disable the seismic scram while we continue high-speed testing?" A pause. Then, "Captain, that would require me to bypass a safety interlock. If we actually hit something with the seismic scram disabled, the reactor won't automatically shut down." Behrens understands the hesitation. Disabling safety systems is how accidents happen, but they need to complete this testing. They need to prove Skipjack can sustain high speed without triggering false alarms that would cripple her in combat. "Understood, maneuvering. Do it, but log it in the engineering records. I'm taking responsibility." "Aye, Captain. Bypassing seismic scram. Interlock." With the false alarm resolved, Behrens returns his attention to the more immediate problem: stern plane flutter. At 35 knots, the control surfaces are operating at the edge of their design envelope. The flutter could be a precursor to catastrophic failure, a control surface tearing loose, leaving the boat unable to control depth. All ahead, 2/3, reduce speed to 25 knots. Skipjack slows. As the speed drops below 30 knots, the stern plane flutter diminishes. By 25 knots, it has disappeared entirely. The boat is stable again, controllable, well within her comfort zone. Behrens turns to his executive officer. "XO, what's your assessment?" Lieutenant Commander Peterson considers carefully before answering. "Captain, we've proven she can hit 35 knots, but we've also found the edge. The stern planes can't handle sustained high-speed maneuvering. Straight line speed is one thing, combat maneuvering is another." He's right. In combat, Skipjack won't just run straight at maximum speed. She'll turn, dive, climb, evade. And if the stern planes flutter every time she maneuvers above 30 knots, her theoretical speed advantage becomes meaningless. But Behrens also knows that this is exactly what sea trials are for: finding problems, identifying limits, gathering data that engineers can use to refine the design. The stern plane issue is solvable. Stronger hydraulics, different control surface geometry, better flow management. The next boat in the class won't have this problem. Agreed. We'll limit high-speed maneuvering to 30 knots for the remainder of trials, but I want a full engineering analysis of that stern plane flutter. Warships needs to know exactly what's happening and at what speed threshold it begins. For the next 8 hours, Skipjack runs through her test matrix. Crash dives from periscope depth, emergency surfacing from 400 feet, high-speed turns at varying speeds, deep diving to test depth, the classified depth beyond which the pressure hull is not guaranteed to survive. Every evolution demonstrates the same fundamental truth: the teardrop hull works. Skipjack is faster, more maneuverable, more hydrodynamically efficient than any submarine that has ever operated. The engineers were right. The physics was sound. At 1800 hours, as the sun sets over the Atlantic, Behrens brings Skipjack back to periscope depth. He raises the search periscope and scans the horizon. Empty ocean. No contacts. They are alone out here, free to test the limits of submarine performance without witnesses. He lowers the periscope and turns to his crew. They have been at general quarters for 10 hours straight, monitoring systems recording data, executing precise maneuvers in response to his orders. They are exhausted but exhilarated. They know what they have accomplished. Gentlemen, secure from sea trials. Set the maneuvering watch. We're heading home. The tension drains from the control room. Men relax at their stations. Someone cracks a joke. The normal sounds of submarine operations, the hum of ventilation, the ping of the fathometer, the murmur of conversations, replace the focused silence of testing. But Behrens remains at his position, staring at the speed log that recorded every knot, every evolution, every moment of this historic day. 35 knots. They hit 35 knots submerged in a fully operational combat submarine. They proved that speed and stealth are not mutually exclusive, that a properly designed hull can slip through water with minimal resistance while carrying enough weapons and sensors to be a lethal combat platform. They proved that everything the Navy believed about submarine performance limits was based on obsolete assumptions. And most importantly, though Behrens doesn't know this yet, won't know it for years, they proved that the Soviet Union's submarine fleet is now obsolete. Every diesel boat, every early nuclear boat, every hunter-killer submarine the Soviets have built is too slow to catch Skipjack, too slow to intercept her, too slow to matter in a high-speed underwater pursuit. The balance of undersea power has shifted, and it shifted today, off the coast of Long Island, at a depth of 300 feet, at a speed that physics said was impractical. If you find this kind of engineering triumph and naval innovation as fascinating as we do, we'd be honored if you'd hit that subscribe button. We believe these stories of calculated engineering risk and technological revolution deserve to be told. And by subscribing, you help us ensure they aren't forgotten. April 15th, 1959. USS Skipjack returns to Groton, Connecticut, after completing her sea trials. The data from those trials is classified immediately: speed capabilities, reactor performance, acoustic signature measurements. The Soviet Union cannot know what the Americans have achieved, but within the Navy's submarine design bureaus, the data spreads quickly. Engineers at Electric Boat, at Portsmouth Naval Shipyard, at the Naval Reactors program pore over the test results. They analyze every measurement, every performance curve, every limit that was found. The conclusion is unanimous. The teardrop hull combined with nuclear propulsion is the future of submarine design. Within months, plans are drawn up for an entire class of submarines based on Skipjack's hull form. They will be larger, more capable, with improved sonar systems and weapons. But the fundamental design, the teardrop shape, the single propeller, The emphasis on speed and hydrodynamic efficiency will be identical to Skipjack's revolutionary concept. These submarines will be designated the Thresher class, later renamed the Permit class after the tragic loss of USS Thresher in 1963. 14 submarines will be built to this design between 1960 and 1967. Every one of them will be faster than any Soviet submarine afloat. But the design, evolution doesn't stop there. The Thresher Permit class will be followed by the Sturgeon class, 37 submarines built between 1963 and 1975, all using refined versions of Skipjack's Teardrop hull. These boats will add length to accommodate more weapons and sensors, but the core hydrodynamic principles remain unchanged. And then comes the Los Angeles class, 62 submarines built between 1972 and 1996, representing the largest single class of nuclear submarines ever constructed. Every Los Angeles-class boat traces its lineage directly to Skipjack. The same teardrop hull form, the same single-shaft propulsion, the same emphasis on speed. The Los Angeles class refines the design, makes it quieter, adds advanced sonar and weapon systems. But the fundamental concept, the idea that a submarine should be optimized for underwater speed rather than surface operations, comes from Skipjack. Even the modern Virginia-class attack submarines entering service in the 21st century use hull forms derived from Skipjack's revolutionary design. 70 years after Skipjack's sea trials, the teardrop hull remains the dominant submarine architecture. USS Skipjack didn't just prove a concept. She established a template that would define American submarine design for 3 generations. But what about the Soviets? In 1959, Soviet naval intelligence knew that the Americans were building a new class of nuclear submarines. Spy networks reported construction activity at Electric Boat. Reconnaissance satellites photographed hull sections being assembled. The Soviets knew something was different about these new boats. They were shorter than previous American submarines, with unusual proportions. But they didn't know why until Skipjack went operational. Soviet submarines first encountered Skipjack-class boats in the early 1960s. The reports from Soviet submarine commanders were alarming. American submarines were faster than predicted, much faster. Soviet diesel boats could barely keep pace on the surface, let alone submerged. Soviet nuclear submarines like the November class could make 28 knots, which had seemed adequate until they tried to intercept an American submarine doing 35 knots effortlessly. The Soviet Navy faced a crisis. Their entire submarine fleet, hundreds of diesel boats, dozens of nuclear boats, all optimized for different design priorities, was now obsolete. The Americans had achieved a breakthrough that gave them decisive tactical advantage in any underwater engagement. The Soviet response was frantic. Design bureaus were ordered to develop high-speed submarines immediately. Engineers studied what little intelligence they could gather about American hull designs. They ran their own water tunnel tests. They experimented with teardrop hulls. But the Soviets faced constraints the Americans didn't. Soviet metallurgy was inferior. Their steel was heavier, their welding techniques less refined. Soviet reactors were less efficient. Soviet manufacturing tolerances were wider, making it difficult to achieve the smooth hull surfaces that low-drag designs required. The result was the Alpha-class submarine, first launched in 1971, 12 years after Skipjack. The Alpha was extraordinary. Titanium hull, allowing extreme deep diving, a liquid metal-cooled reactor providing tremendous power, a streamlined hull form optimized for speed. The Alpha could hit 43 knots submerged, faster than Skipjack, faster than any American submarine. But the Alpha was also a nightmare to operate. The liquid metal reactor required constant heating even in port, or the coolant would solidify. The titanium hull was extraordinarily expensive. Each Alpha cost as much as 5 conventional submarines. Only 7 were built, and they were plagued by mechanical problems. More importantly, the Alpha was loud. Hydrodynamic noise at 43 knots made stealth impossible. American submarines could hear an Alpha coming from 50 miles away. Speed without stealth is just a target. The Americans learned from this. When they designed the Los Angeles class, they deliberately limited speed to 33 knots, fast enough for tactical advantage, slow enough to maintain acoustic stealth. The Soviets learned too late that speed alone doesn't win submarine warfare. The silent hunter is more dangerous than the fast prey. By the 1980s, the submarine speed race was over. Both superpowers had converged on similar design philosophies. Optimize for a balance of speed, stealth, and endurance. The teardrop hull became universal, and the submarine that started it all, USS Skipjack, was recognized by both sides as the design that changed everything. What the speed trials and subsequent operational deployments proved was something more subtle than just submarines can be fast. They proved that the fundamental assumptions governing 50 years of submarine design were wrong. Before Skipjack, navies designed submarines for surface operations, with diving as a temporary tactical option. After Skipjack, submarines were designed as underwater vehicles that could surface if necessary. The paradigm inverted. This had cascading effects on every aspect of submarine warfare. Tactics changed. Pre-Skipjack submarines hunted from ambush positions, waiting for targets to come to them. Post-Skipjack submarines could chase down targets, intercept them at range, position themselves aggressively. The submarine transformed from a defensive weapon to an offensive hunter. Sonar strategy changed. When submarines were slow, passive sonar was sufficient. You could wait silently and listen for contacts approaching. When submarines became fast, active sonar became tactically viable. You could ping, detect contacts at long range, then use your speed to close for attack before the enemy could evade. Weapons changed. Torpedoes had to become faster to catch fast submarines. The Mark 48 torpedo, introduced in 1972, could sustain 55 knots specifically to hunt Soviet submarines that might be doing 40 knots. The entire underwater warfare equation shifted to higher speeds. Training changed. Submarine commanders had to learn to think in 3 dimensions at high speed. The old diesel boat mentality, patient, cautious, conservative, gave way to aggressive maneuvering tactics that treated the ocean like an aerial combat arena. But perhaps the most important impact was psychological. Skipjack proved that technical innovation could overcome what seemed like immutable physical limits. The engineers who said submarines cannot be made fast were not wrong about the physics. They were wrong about what was possible within those physics, given better design. This lesson echoed through the Cold War submarine force. When engineers said submarines cannot dive below 1,000 feet, the Navy built submarines that dove to 2,000 feet. When experts said submarines cannot operate silently at high power, the Navy developed quiet reactor designs. When conventional wisdom said something was impossible, submarine designers asked, what if we're wrong about impossible? Skipjack didn't just break speed records, she broke the assumption that records were unbreakable. Commander William W. Behrens, Jr. commanded USS Skipjack until 1960, when he rotated to shore duty at the Bureau of Ships. He spent the next phase of his career helping design the next generation of fast attack submarines, incorporating lessons learned from Skipjack's operational deployments. He was promoted to captain in 1961, to rear admiral in 1969. He eventually commanded Submarine Squadron 10, overseeing multiple Skipjack-class and Sturgeon-class submarines operating from New London, Connecticut. He retired from the Navy in 1975 after 33 years of service. In retirement, Behrens rarely spoke publicly about Skipjack's sea trials. The specific speed achieved, 35 knots and higher, remained classified until the 1990s. Even after declassification, Behrens was modest about his role. I just drove the boat, he would say. The engineers at Electric Boat and the Naval Reactors team deserve the credit for building her. But his crew remembered differently. They remembered a captain who was willing to push an untested design to its limits, who trusted the engineers but verified their calculations through careful, methodical testing. They remembered a commander who took calculated risks, disabling the seismic scram sensor, running at maximum power for extended periods, because the mission required it. Behrens died in 2003 at the age of 82. His obituary in the Naval Academy Alumni magazine noted his command of the revolutionary USS Skipjack, but did not mention the specific speeds achieved. Even in death, some secrets remained classified. USS Skipjack herself had a long and distinguished operational career. After completing trials and workup, she deployed to the Atlantic and Mediterranean, conducting surveillance operations against Soviet submarines and surface forces. During the Cuban Missile Crisis in October 1962, Skipjack was one of multiple American submarines deployed to the quarantine line, tasked with tracking Soviet submarines attempting to reach Cuba. Her speed advantage allowed her to intercept and trail Soviet boats that other American submarines couldn't catch. Declassified Soviet naval records from the crisis mention encounters with an exceptionally fast American submarine that Soviet captains could not evade. In 1963, Skipjack participated in NATO exercises off Norway, demonstrating her capabilities to Allied naval forces. British and Norwegian submarine officers who observed Skipjack's performance were stunned by her speed and maneuverability. The British immediately accelerated their own nuclear submarine program, incorporating lessons from Skipjack's design. Throughout the 1960s and 1970s, Skipjack conducted intelligence-gathering missions along Soviet submarine bases, recorded acoustic signatures of new Soviet submarine classes, and trained a generation of submarine officers in high-speed tactics. She was decommissioned on April 19, 1990, after 31 years of service, an extraordinarily long career for a first-of-class prototype that pushed so many boundaries. Most revolutionary designs have short service lives as they're superseded by improved versions. Skipjack lasted 3 decades because her fundamental design was so sound that even newer submarines couldn't obsolete her. After decommissioning, Skipjack entered the nuclear-powered ship and submarine recycling program. Her reactor was defueled, her hull was cut apart, and her components were recycled. No museum preservation. No memorial display. The Navy's policy for nuclear submarines is complete dismantlement. Too many classified technologies, too many sensitive components. Today, nothing remains of USS Skipjack except photographs, declassified documents, and the memories of the men who served aboard her. But her legacy endures in every American attack submarine afloat. The Virginia-class boats patrolling the oceans today are Skipjack's descendants, larger, quieter, more capable, but still using the same fundamental teardrop hull form that was validated off Long Island in April 1959. There is a small memorial at the Submarine Force Museum in Groton, Connecticut. It's easy to miss if you're not looking for it. A modest plaque listing the Skipjack-class submarines and their commissioning dates. 6 boats total: Skipjack, Scamp, Scorpion, Sculpin, Shark, and Snook. 5 of the 6 are listed with decommissioning dates, but USS Scorpion has different notation. Lost with all hands, May 22, 1968. Scorpion was the second Skipjack-class submarine built, commissioned in 1960. She disappeared in the Atlantic while returning from deployment, killing all 99 crew members. The Sun wreck was found 5 months later in 10,000 feet of water. The cause of the sinking was never definitively determined. Possibly a torpedo malfunction, possibly a mechanical failure, possibly a hostile act. Scorpion's loss cast a shadow over the Skipjack class. Some critics argued that the high-speed design was inherently dangerous, that pushing the boundaries of submarine performance created risks that conventional designs avoided. The Navy convened investigations, reviewed structural designs, implemented safety modifications across the fleet. But the conclusion was clear. Scorpion's loss was not a design flaw in the Teardrop hull. The same hydrodynamics that made Skipjack revolutionary worked equally well on all 6 boats of the class. The other 5 submarines had long, safe service lives. Whatever killed Scorpion was a specific failure, not a systematic design problem. Still, the loss serves as a reminder that submarine operations, especially at the edge of performance envelopes, carry inherent risks. The men who crewed Skipjack-class boats knew they were operating machines that were faster, more aggressive, more capable than anything that came before. They accepted the risks because the mission mattered. 99 men died aboard Scorpion, but their sacrifice did not invalidate the revolutionary concept they were testing. It proved that pushing boundaries, in warfare, in engineering, in human capability, always carries cost. The question is whether the gain justifies that cost. For USS Skipjack and her revolutionary design, history's verdict is clear. The gain was worth it. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. Every click tells the algorithm this piece of history is worth remembering. We're dedicated to rescuing these forgotten stories from the archives, stories of engineering breakthroughs that changed the balance of power, of commanders who took calculated risks to validate revolutionary concepts, of crews who trusted their boats even when testing the limits of what submarines could do. If you want to join us on this mission, please subscribe and turn on notifications. We have dozens more stories like this one, stories of submarines that broke the rules of physics, of engineers who refused to accept limits, of designs that transformed naval warfare. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment with your city or state, and tell us if someone in your family served in the silent service. We read every comment. Your family's service matters, their stories matter. And here's the last thing I want you to remember. On April 15, 1959, off the coast of Long Island, USS Skipjack accelerated through water at 35 knots submerged, a speed that every naval architect said was impractical, that every submarine commander said was unnecessary, that every physicist said would create insurmountable drag. Commander William Behrens pushed that revolutionary boat to her limits and proved the experts wrong. The Teardrop hull worked. The hydrodynamics were sound. The speed was real. And in that moment, 50 years of submarine design doctrine became obsolete. The Soviet Union scrambled to match American speed and failed to balance speed with stealth. The United States built 62 Los Angeles-class submarines using Skipjack's hull form. Every attack submarine in the U.S. Navy today traces its lineage to that one revolutionary boat. Thank you for ensuring that Commander William W. Behrens, Jr. and the 93 men who crewed USS Skipjack during her historic trials do not disappear into the deep. They deserve to be remembered. They proved that submarines could be fast. They proved that speed and stealth were compatible. They proved that when engineering brilliance meets calculated courage, the impossible becomes merely difficult. USS Skipjack, SSN 585, April 15, 1959, 35 knots submerged. Some records aren't meant to be broken, they're meant to shatter everything that came before. And some revolutionary designs don't just change the game, they rewrite the rules entirely. The Teardrop hull was laughed at by conventional naval architects who said it sacrificed too much for theoretical gains. USS Skipjack proved them wrong at 35 knots. And the submarine force, American, Soviet, and every navy that followed, has been building Teardrop hulls ever since.